Lion in the Wind, Chapter 18. The Gorg troops listened to the scattered explosions and fighting behind their lines and waited nervously for orders. Something wasn't right, but they didn't know what. A moment later a dark, twisted voice echoed out of the darkness. "Charge! Attack!" it cried. The Gorg soldiers looked at each other in confusion. "Move, you lazy slugs! Go! Destroy the Yggdrasil!" it cried again. A moment later a roaring cheer erupted from the Gorg lines as thousands of soldiers raced forward in a wild, frenzied charge towards the Yggdrasil lines. Not far away, Nagago, who'd been the mysterious voice in the night, watched as the battle began. He laughed with evil delight. If the Gorg wouldn't go of their own free will, then he would send them forward himself. And send them he did as his crying voice drove an irreparable fire through their bones, forcing them to charge, even to the point of doing so foolishly. No matter how many of them died, so long as the Yggdrasil were wiped out, he would be satisfied. He watched the battle as it rapidly gained momentum. After several minutes, satisfied that his work was now done, he vanished into the darkness. "Here they come," shouted Welk as he spotted the advancing Gorg troops. "Hold your fire till they get closer," shouted Pentel. Other similar rallying cries echoed up and down the Yggdrasil lines as soldiers readied themselves to repel this assault. A moment later, the Gorg opened fire. Bullets roared over the heads of the Yggdrasil troops like a torrential flood. The men all shrank down deep into their trenches to avoid the metallic onslaught. Several men tried to brave the hail of bullets, but were quickly cut down. "Stay under cover. Wait until they're closer," shouted an officer. The men stayed down as ordered. But their wait seemed like an eternity as great swarms of bullets roared over their heads. A moment later the Yggdrasil artillery answered the Gorg battle cry with a thunderous symphony of their own. The intense shelling forced the Gorg to seek cover as the shower of deadly steel tore through their ranks like a brush hog. Seeing an opportunity to turn the battle in their favor, a cry of "open fire" went up throughout the Yggdrasil lines. 1,000 heads emerged from the Yggdrasil trenches, followed by a hail of rifle and automatic gunfire that ripped into the Gorg troops like a hammer, surprising the advancing forces with its suddenness and intensity. Yggdrasil machine guns walked the Gorg lines from one end to the other like a grim reaper, carving a bloody swath through the advancing infantry. The Gorg struggled to get organized and answer the Yggdrasil as their forces were systematically cut to shreds. After nearly a half hour of fighting, with little to show for it, the Gorg finally began to advance a foot at a time, doing everything they could to salvage their assault and possibly turn it into a victory. The attack briefly gained momentum and then was again hammered to a halt by a fresh onslaught of Yggdrasil artillery. The Gorg tried desperately to hold on and push forward their attack. But soon determination gave way to fear and their attack quickly crumbled into a disorganized retreat. Within minutes the battlefield became completely silent, save for the gentle crackle of burning vehicles and the moans of the wounded and dying. As the twin suns crested the distant horizon the following morning, they illuminated the blood-stained battlefield, revealing to everyone the extent of the carnage from the night before. Welk took a rag from his pocket and wiped the dirt and sweat from his face as he studied the grim, grisly scene before him. "Looks like we gave them a pretty good beating, didn't we?" said Welk. "A beating, yes, but I wouldn't count this as a victory just yet. We've still got 6 missing lions and not enough men. If they hit us again, we could be in a world of hurt," said Pentel. Just then a colonel dropped into their trench next to Pentel. "Morning, Lieutenant," he said. "Morning, sir," replied Pentel. "I hear you guys did a good job last night repelling that assault." "Thank you, sir." "So where's your lions this morning? Headquarters said you had 6 of them with you." Pentel's mind began reeling. If he told the colonel the truth, it could spell trouble for himself, his men, and most especially the lions. "They're out on recon right now, sir," he said, trying to make up a believable excuse. "Oh good, I was just about to ask if you could do exactly that." "How soon till you hear back from them?" asked the colonel. Pentel shrugged. "I don't know, sir. They'll report in when they find something worth reporting." The colonel nodded, patted Pentel on the shoulder, and said, "All right, keep me informed." I will, sir, said Pentel. The colonel then turned and hurried further down the line. Welk watched him go before turning to Pentel with an expression of confusion on his face. You just lied to a ranking officer, said Welk. Well, what did you expect me to do? I certainly wasn't going to tell him that our lions went AWOL on us, replied Pentel. Welk thought about this briefly. Good idea. So what's our plan? What do you mean? Asked Pentel. Well, we've got 6 missing lions. We've got to do something. Pentel raised his binoculars and studied the battlefield briefly before lowering them and slipping down into his trench again. I don't know. We'll give them until dark to get back here. If they don't return, we may have to go out after them. Into that mess. That's suicide if you ask me. Got any better ideas? Welk sighed. No, not at the moment. Pentel shook his head. Yeah, neither do I. In the meantime, keep trying to raise them on the radio. If they finally answer, order them to get back here ASAP. Will do. Delgro watched as their bus pulled to a stop in front of a large, fortress-like facility. Great, powerful parapets guarded 2 heavy, reinforced gates as guards walked its fence in search of potential intruders. The place had a strange, almost medieval feel to it. He was impressed with the incredible security that the facility offered, both from its secluded location and its well-designed security. If he didn't know better, he would have mistaken it for a military outpost rather than a civilian research lab. The facility was well laid out and highly defensible, such that 1 battalion of men could easily hold off an entire division or more of enemy troops. Whoever had picked the location and the design of the facility had chosen well. But his intrigue was quickly replaced by concern as the bus pulled up to the front gate. Hanging from the large footbridge that spanned the top of the main gate was a placard with the Cybergenics logo and the words Robotics Research Laboratory No. 3. Delgra's eyes narrowed. This was one of Black's facilities. The buses soon continued through the first gate, past the second, and then deep into the main complex. Even inside its walls the place was foreboding. He quickly identified numerous hidden pillboxes and other defensive structures that sat perched just behind the second gate. He spotted even more as they moved deeper into the complex. Whoever got through the first 2 defensive lines would still have a hard time capturing the facility, as they'd be forced to fight bitterly for every inch of ground they took. The buses soon came to a stop and everyone got off. As Delgra organized his men, Elgar walked up behind him. Mr. Black would like to see you, he said. Delgra glanced briefly at Elgar, and then followed him as he was led through a series of security checkpoints to a large and stately office which strongly contrasted the very rough, Spartan-like appearance of the facility outside. As he entered he noticed Black sitting behind a large, ornate wooden desk with his fingers crossed, and a devilish grin on his face. Ah, Major, it's so good to see you again, said Black beatifically. Delgra studied Black with a hint of suspicion. Why are we here? He asked. Black laughed. You're always straight and to the point. That's why I like you. So, if you must know, it's because your facility was no longer secure. Since the work you were doing there was far too important to risk having the Gorg capture, or worse yet, destroy it, I asked the government to send you to me so that I could better protect you, and your work, he said with a hint of elegance. Delgra crossed his arms and glared at Black. I gather that much from our orders. But why were we brought here specifically? Wouldn't another military research facility be more appropriate? He asked. Black grinned devilishly. Come, have you not seen the excellent protection this place offers? I would think that, with the valuable nature of your projects and staff, you'd want something with a bit more protection than a typical military facility. I do, but why do you have a place like this? Asked Delgra suspiciously. I believe in the principle of being well prepared. I would be a fool to think that my own highly sensitive projects would not, at some time, also become a target of the Gorg. It's why I built this place. When we began having issues with them over a decade ago, I decided that it was best to ensure the future of all my projects, and our nation, by building this place. So far your government hasn't complained about my doing so. Therefore, I have to assume that they approve of it. Delgra's eyes narrowed. Do they even know about it? Oh, but of course. I mean, why else would you be here if they didn't? Delgra's eyes narrowed further. I meant before this week, said Delgra flatly. Black laughed. Yes, they did. In fact, some of the defensive planning that went into its design came from our country's finest military engineers. Delgra pondered this briefly, and then relaxed somewhat. All right, so moving along. What is my purpose here? Obviously security won't be an issue. So I can't think that my men would be needed for that. Oh, quite on the contrary. Your men are just as important to the defense and administration of this place as mine are. So I want you to take charge of this facility in the same way that you did at your previous location and run it with the expert military precision you are so well known for. Delgra cocked an eyebrow. You actually want me to run this place for you? He asked. Black nodded. I do indeed. So how much will I be responsible for? Asked Delgra. Black grinned slyly. All of it. I'll pay the bills, with our government's help, of course, and you run the show. It's that simple. My men will be completely at your disposal throughout the duration of your stay. So you are free to do whatever you feel is necessary to ensure the safety and security of this facility. And what about you? What will your role here be? Black shrugged. As I said, I'm merely the purse strings that will help you do your job. So don't be afraid to spend as much as you need to complete your mission. Just please, try not to bankrupt me in the process, okay? He said with an impish grin. Delgra nodded. I'll do my best. Tegani looked around the battlefield and studied the situation. It looks like they've given up. What should we do now? Said Pasa over the radio. They haven't given up yet, but the present danger has passed, so we need to get back to our unit. We'll decide on any future actions from there, replied Tegani. He then turned and began trotting in the direction of their comrades. As they drew close, they found the Yigsen lines battered, but intact. However, given the incredible Gorg body count in front of the Yigsen fortifications, he was surprised that their condition was not any worse than it was. As Tegani scanned the lines for signs of his unit, he soon spotted a familiar face. Sergeant Welk, can you hear me? He said over the radio. Tegani, came the startled reply. Don't shoot. I'm closing on your position now. I think I see you. Come on in, replied Welk. Tegani hurried up to the trench and slipped in. As he did, Welk looked at him in startled surprise as he verified that it was in fact Tegani. Pentel heard the noise and soon came to investigate. It wasn't long before he spotted the lion and blinked in surprise. Where in the flames of Varric have you been? He whispered strongly. Protecting our men, replied Tegani. What are you talking about? I saw a danger that threatened our lives, so my siblings and I left to deal with it. Pentel grunted. You weren't supposed to move from this trench unless I told you to. Don't you understand that? He said angrily. Tegani tilted his head back slightly in confusion. Is it not permissible for a soldier to act against the wishes of his superior if it is in the best interests of the unit, or if it will save lives? Pentel opened his mouth to say something, and then closed it. He's right, sir, said Welk. Pentel grunted. Maybe so. But what was so important that you felt it necessary to leave us like that? Tegani then laid out the events of the previous day to Pentel. Both he and Welk were stunned at what the 6 lions had done. You guys really did all that, said Welk in surprise. Tegani nodded. Pentel chuckled. Well, I guess you really did have a good reason for leaving us. Plus, I have to admit that the whole Gorg shelling themselves thing was rather ingenious. I'll have to commend your brother for thinking of that. Tegani frowned slightly. Please don't. I do not wish to encourage him to take such risks with my life again, he said flatly. The 2 men laughed. Pentel then patted the lion on the shoulder. Well, it's still good to have you back. Next time, though, please consult with me first before going off on any more wild adventures like that. Tegani nodded. I will endeavor to do so, sir. "Dr. Bergen, how are you this morning?" said Black with a smile as he walked into the laboratory. "Oh, good morning, sir," replied Bergen. "Settling well into your new laboratory?" Bergen nodded. "I have a lot to unpack, but I should be done by this afternoon." "Good, good. Once you're done, I have a little project for you." Bergen stared curiously at Black and asked, "What kind of project?" Black held out a sheet of paper to him and grinned widely. Bergen took and read it curiously. He then nearly gagged in surprise. "A production order for more lions," said Bergen. "Yes, isn't it fabulous? Your lions are going to be reproduced in quantities great enough to help us win this war. Think of it, 650 Taganis running around the battlefield destroying those filthy Gorg mongrels and driving them into extinction," said Black jubilantly. "Well, that may be easier said than done," replied Bergen with a hint of melancholy. Said Black in confusion. "Well, how are we going to manufacture that many? This is just a laboratory. We can produce, at most, maybe 6 or 7 units every 2 weeks. That production rate means that it will take several years to fill this order." Black blinked in surprise, grinned, and soon roared with laughter. He then sighed happily, and said, "Doctor, you are quite hilarious at times. You almost scared me there for a moment." "But I'm being serious," protested Bergen. "Who said that you would be using your laboratory to produce the lions? We have a fully equipped manufacturing facility on site that can produce them in quantity. With it we should be able to meet our order from the government in just a few weeks. From there we can load their operating systems and send them into battle." "There may be a problem with that as well," said Bergen. "How so?" asked Black curiously. "Well, for starters, we can't simply load each one of them with a generic operating system and then send them off to war like a bunch of good little soldiers. Once loaded, their operating system must be nurtured and allowed to properly mature before any of the lions can be considered safe to release into the wild, and especially combat. So they need a period of time to mature before they can function in the ways they will be required to," asked Black curiously. Bergen nodded. "Yes. How long does this usually take?" "A minimum of 2 weeks per unit." Black shook his head. "That's too long. 650 lions, times 2 weeks each, we don't have to do them one at a time. Several units can be done at the same time. Even so, that's a lot of time that will need to be spent on these new lions. It's time that I don't feel is necessary to be spent." Bergen sighed. "Do you remember in biology class when they described how our minds grow by making connections between neurons as we learn?" asked Bergen. Black nodded. "Yes. But what does that have to do with your lions? They're robots, not reptiles." "Well, it's much the same way with the lions. No two of their minds end up being exactly the same, nor do they grow in the exact same way despite the fact that they all come from the same root program. Their minds are designed to learn, expand, adapt and grow on their own. The 2 weeks we spend with them ensures that they will all grow and mature properly. If their minds are not properly founded, I cannot say what might happen to them in the future. I'd rather take the extra time now than risk something horrible happening later on," said Bergen. Black found this intriguing. "So it's like training a child to become a responsible adult?" he asked. "Exactly." Black shook his head. "I still don't understand why this is necessary. They'll be soldiers, not citizens. It's because my robots grow and mature in the same way that a living creature does, only much, much faster. If we don't take the steps to properly mature them, there could be a lot of issues that arise later on down the road that we don't want to deal with," said Bergen. Black frowned. "Fine. I don't like it. But if you say it's necessary, then we'll do it. But, I want you to find a way to speed up the maturing process. We need to get them into service as quickly as possible, or we could very well lose this war, and our lives as well." Bergen nodded. "I'll do my best, sir. Please see that you do." He then turned and left. Bergen inhaled deeply, and said, 650 lions. Wow. Tegani's going to have quite a family when we're done."